So I'm Mark Cowling. I'm with Gather Movement. We have a small core team that connects with a large network across the country of church unity networks and movements. And it's lovely to invite you to this learning community webinar. We do this usually the second Tuesday every month. And we think about how can we go further together as a church network across our towns and cities? What does that mean? How do we build unity, functional unity? And what does transformation of our places look like? Spiritually, socially, and culturally. And so we're absolutely thrilled to have Andy Frost from Gather Movement and Share Jesus International with us, and Stephen Sutton from, I've forgotten the name of your Baptist church in Teesside. You want to just tell us?
Yeah, so we've just changed the name of it a few months ago. So it's called the Beacon Church, yeah.
Beacon Church. Great. And you're part of Transforming Teesside, is that right? That's the name of the Unity group? Great. So we're looking forward to hearing you both share about working across your cities and places in terms of sharing faith. Without further ado, let's welcome you both. And Andy, I'm going to ask you to start us off, if that's all right. You've been working across Greater London and other places around the country, haven't you? Tell us about this idea about sharing faith as a network of churches and your reflections on that, would you?
Yeah, hi there, everyone. Good to be on the call with you all today. I just work with local churches looking at mission evangelism, but also work with different networks. Just this morning, we've been with about 130 church leaders from across London, looking at how we can collaborate together on mission and faith sharing. I bet something really powerful happens when we work together across a borough, across a town or a city to see how we can best share the Christian faith relevantly and faithfully.
Fantastic. And you've got some reflections on how we might do that well.
Yeah, so we wrote a little resource a couple of years ago now, which is on the SGI website, a free download from Gather and SGI, looking really at why do this and what some of the stories that how people are doing it across the country. About 9 different stories in there for how people are doing it. There's something about important showing that we are one body, we are one people working collaboratively. Something about the learning you get when you're working collaboratively, the resources you have when you're working collaboratively. The idea of follow-up when somebody comes to faith, how do you best help them find a local church near to them? That works better when we're working collaboratively. The numbers to do things significant works better when we're working collaboratively. The encouragement from different churches we get, the reach we have, the understanding we get, and then the vision we had to see our places transform, not just socially, but also spiritually as well.
Brilliant. So I've just put the link in the chat there so people can have a look at those things. There's some sort of 9 different reflections, is that right? That help us to think through the benefits of working together as a network. Is that right, Andy?
Yes, there's kind of 9 ideas for why I think it's important, and then lots of these different stories from around the country and how it's been done in different ways. Some are really approaching it through a kind of common theme or common idea. It's been great hearing people doing things around prayer and how they can really engage prayer across a town or a city. I think when you do something under one brand or one name or one title across a place, people in different places begin to pick up that thing and say, hang on a sec, isn't that what I saw there and what I saw over there as well? And there's a real sense of actually something bigger is happening around them.
Yeah, wonderful. And Andy, you come from a great family tradition of sharing our faith. Tell us how long you've been, involved with this ministry yourself.
I think since I was a baby in some ways. I think it wasn't by choice always, but in my teenage years. But the last kind of 25 years really, I've been working with local churches, but also working kind of city or town wide. And it's been a real joy to work with different denominations, different streams of church, and work out what we can do collaboratively going forwards.
Yeah, amazing. And you've really been, researching and pioneering and learning about this for today, haven't you? So you want to tell us a bit more about your research and some of the things you've discovered?
See, one of the things we've been doing recently is working out actually how do we approach sharing. And I think often we think of an evangelist and we think it has to be done in a certain way, maybe wearing a certain type of suit and a certain stage and a certain platform. But actually, each and every one of us has a way to share our faith. It's working out how has God created us to be and how do we begin to share our faith naturally, but also what is the stretch for each of us to become more maybe intentional in sharing what Christ has done in our lives. To be honest, So basically, it's a three-part process. The first part was the idea of theories, lots of ideas from working with churches. And we did a questionnaire to work out which of those theories had some kind of ideas that could become more tangible. And we did some in-depth questionnaires to work out actually how can we dig into some of this research to find out what's really going on. And all this research drew us to kind of four main tensions that undergird how we approach faith sharing.
Okay, so give us the first one.
So the first one is the idea of response. So when it comes to faith sharing, are we expecting people to respond in a moment, or are we expecting them to have a journey where they gradually discover more of who Christ is? So the moment, for example, that would be that, I think the moment would be the man on the cross. In that moment, he accepts Christ and who he is. Or Paul on the road to Damascus, that moment when it all becomes clear. But for others in the Gospels, it's much more of a journey. So I think Peter saying exactly when he became a follower of Jesus, I mean, it's hard to exactly say what moment did he fully understand what he was doing. It was more of a journey thing of understanding more of what the gospel was, more of who Jesus was, to that day in Acts when he gets up and he preaches the gospel. So is it about a moment or is it about a journey? So all of us will have a leaning either way. And often that impacts the way we approach faith sharing in a church, but also in a city or a town as well. Are we trying to create these unique moments people say yes or no to the gospel? Or are we trying to create routes and pathways people to have a journey going forward? So that's the first of the tensions.
Let's just go into that a bit more. So how do we deal with that tension? Is it one or the other, or any wisdom on that?
It isn't one or the other, and it's actually both and, I think. But often we're coming to look at maybe from different churches thinking about how we're going to approach it. There'll be some people who are approaching it from the moment point of view, and some who are approaching it from the journey point of view. So often we have these very difficult conversations. We don't quite understand what each other's saying because we've got a different understanding of what it means. So, for example, if your own personal story, you came to faith in a moment, you might think it's much more about a moment of saying yes to Jesus. But if your faith's been more gradual, where you've gradually discovered more, then actually make more of the approach that it's a gradual journey. And how do we invite people to the next step on that journey rather than doing it all in one go? That's the first tension.
Great. So I love that because as unity networks of different churches, actually, if we can hold a common language together and appreciate the different ways of doing it and the kind of both and approach, actually we're going further together, aren't we? And helping us just navigate that conversation. So that's brilliant. So what's the second tension?
The second one is whose responsibility is it to share their faith? Is it something that I do personally? Or is something that we do corporately as a group of people? So in a local church, you might have somebody who thinks it's very much their personal role to share their faith. They will commit to praying for their neighbor, to visiting their neighbor, to sharing with the neighbor, to discipling the neighbor. It's their personal role, they feel. But for others, I think it's much more of a corporate thing. It's what I do as a church activity. So if the church is running an Alpha course or Christianity Explored course, I'm going to be involved with that. It's a corporate thing rather than a personal thing. I think that even citywide, we're thinking churches working collaboratively. How are we empowering people? Are we empowering them to do it by themselves as individuals, taking on that personal responsibility, or are we helping to do it corporately as a group activity? So interesting, even this morning in London, looking at different models for how we share our faith, lots of them about a corporate activity where we go out at a certain time that we can do something provocative, maybe on the streets to try and spark some conversations. But for others, much more about a personal thing of how do I give my neighbor Luke's gospel for the first time and begin exploring with them. So the second tension is the idea of responsibility.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. And what about the next one? The third tension.
Yeah, number three is a starting point. Is do we begin with the message or do we begin with a person? So lots of our evangelism training begins with how can I, as quickly and as succinctly as possible, share the Christian faith? So how do I explain spiritual laws? How do I explain some key fundamentals? And it becomes about actually, how do we start with a message? But for others, it's much more about how to begin with a person. How do we explore what God's already doing in their lives? What are the things that God's already stirring? What questions we need to ask to help them understand maybe where God is already at work? We've got a friend who's to work right now on how people discover, first and foremost, they have a soul. So starting way back before the gospel message, starting with actually helping people to become more aware of their own spirituality. So this third tension is about the starting point. Do you begin with the message or do you begin with the person?
That's really interesting. And I guess I remember being at theological college and talking about believing in belonging. And I guess it's something along those lines, isn't it? Some people are itching to know the believing bit. Other people's actually want to belong, that the relationship is the primary thing and the trust through that relationship. Is that what you're getting at with this, Andy?
Yeah, definitely part is that. And it's probably think how we approach it. So are we trying to kind of do we look at it almost actually, how do I share with you as quickly as possible? Or do we actually say, actually, I really want to tease out what God is really doing? I love the idea that when we're doing mission as a city or as a town, God is already at work. And the question is, what is God already doing? How can we jump in with what God's doing rather than maybe kind of having a way, perhaps sort of programmatically working out how we're going to try and do it rather than allowing God to help us discern what that process might be.
That's really helpful. And I guess, yeah, listening and praying is perhaps a real important skill in this approach, isn't it? In this tension.
Yeah, it is for sure, I think. And that tension, again, sometimes is the right time to share the message, but sometimes begin with a conversation, really teasing out what is happening in somebody's life. Which on to the tension is then more maybe obvious, and particularly obvious for church unity groups, is the idea of, do we share our faith in words or is it in action? I'd also say it's both, but generally we have a leaning either way as people, but also think even as churches or even as church unity groups, we might say, well, actually, we're much more about the word, we're about proclaiming, we're about gospel, we're about being out in the streets, or we're much more about action. We want to love people passionately, show that we care as we give them a food parcel, as help them out of debt, as we love them, as we help their kids, wherever it might be. Is it word or is it action? And generally, we have a leaning either way. I think a lot of unity groups lean one way or the other as well. Holding this tension is really important as well.
That's so helpful. I can see that so clearly in the context that I've experienced. Andy, that's really great. So those are some really good foundations. You've also got a way that helps people understand their personality and how faith sharing might complement their personality, so that perhaps there's a kind of fit between the way they share faith and the way that they've, if you like, been made. Do you want to talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's all based upon these four tensions that undergird everything, really. So we definitely have a leaning either way as individuals. And I found it really helpful to have a conversation with churches working together. First of all, in those tensions, to work out where do we naturally lean. Then there's an online quiz you can do to work out. We almost create 6 personas or 6 different personalities for how we generally approach faith sharing. The link is now in the chat, and I'll just share it on the screen now as well, the QR code. If you're into that kind of QR code type thing. And basically,
okay, so we want people to do this now. Is that right? Whilst you're explaining it, or should we wait until you've explained it?
A few quick things. It's often hard to work out which one you tick. Some of them are quite similar, but go for one of them. You might think none of the answers are quite right, but still tick one of them. And you might feel like you're having to make an unfair decision, but there's 12 questions. Tick one of those 12 answers each time, and it will give you one of 6 different profiles for how you might generally approach faith sharing as an individual. So give you 4 minutes to give that a go. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's wonderful. If you take down your slide, I'm gonna open up the screen and just show you my sample. So if everybody can have a go at this, we're going to lead this into a discussion. So here's the first question: how do people normally find out you are a Christian? Because I've been up front and told them, because we've had a conversation that's touched on faith, because I've shared my life story, and because people know I'm involved with my church. How often do you talk about Christian faith with non-Christians? When I can relate it to something in my life, more regularly when there is something relevant happening in my church. I look for opportunities in the everyday, but don't want to force the conversation when I feel prompted by God. Why do you share your faith? Because God has put people in my life to share with, because many people have practical and spiritual needs that need to be met, because we're called to preach the gospel to everyone, because sometimes God gives me an opportunity to speak into someone's life about my faith. Who do you share your faith with? People who I'm doing life with at work or at the school gate, generally those who live locally, who I know I can connect with others. I intentionally look for opportunities with anyone who'll listen, normally those I am serving and working alongside. How do you prefer to share your faith with others? Through sharing my story and experiences of God, by inviting people to church services, events and courses, using the Bible and sharing gospel truths, by demonstrating God's love practically. When do you share your faith? I share my faith in the everyday, generally as I get to know people. My faith is shared by the way I live and is particularly evident in the way I care for others. I share my faith at any given time. I'm always looking for opportunities. As soon as someone finds out about my faith and asks me about it, I share it. How comfortable are you using words to explain your faith? Very comfortable. I use everyday language to share my faith. My actions speak loudly, and I only use words when necessary. I'm comfortable using Bible verses and gospel illustrations to share my faith. I find it hard to put my faith into words and often look to others for help. How do you find faith conversations begin? When someone asks me about my faith? Normally, when people ask me why I do what I do, I normally instigate them. In conversation, I share life with others. What helps you confidently have a conversation about faith? When the person I'm speaking to asks me to share my story, knowing there is somewhere I can invite the person I'm speaking to where they can explore faith, having my Bible handy and knowing how to share the gospel when the person has initiated the conversation. What is a good outcome from a faith-sharing interaction? The person wants to meet again to explore more. The person knows they're loved by God. When someone has grasped what the gospel is all about, when someone is up for coming along to church with me. Shame you can't tick them all, isn't it? What role do you play in helping new Christians grow as a disciple, finding the best place for them to grow in their faith, helping them become part of a loving community, journeying intentionally alongside that person, sharing what life with Jesus looks like, talking through the difference Jesus makes in our lives practically? What role does your church community play in your faith sharing practices? Lots of my faith sharing happens outside of organized church activity. The church community can be supportive, but can be a bit programmatic. Church encourages me in my faith sharing. My church activities and events are integral to how I share my faith. Okay, so then we've got a personality. Andy, do you want to come in at this point and just explain that one?
If you want to, guys, you can put in the chat what you come up with. If you haven't got to, and it isn't to try and box you up, but it's to give you maybe your general way to approaching faith sharing. There are 6 different kind of personal kind of profiles or ways of doing this. I found it really helpful because actually everyone thinks sometimes they have to be in a certain way of doing it. It's finding out actually how has God called you to do it. So if you click the read more button there, Mark, as well.
Yeah.
You'll find so for you, your story is really important. What God's done in your life is really important. And you feel very confident kind of sharing your story of what God's done and how it's impacted your life. Very personable, and you're very able to relate the difference Jesus has made in your personal life and your personal experience. If you scroll down on that page now, you'll see you have a bit of blog about that. Then you have 3 things: something to celebrate about how you do it, something to reflect upon, and then a stretch to help you kind of become slightly more intentional in how you do it as well. So the celebrate, the reflect, and the stretch. There are 6 different profiles, and each one will have a different celebrate, a different reflect, and a different stretch. So if I can share my screen again, Mark, now I'll just kind of show you what the 6 are in one go, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
So 1 second. There you go. So yeah, these are the 6 we come up with. And there is this booklet available download online as well. So first of all, are the intentional disciples who really see the whole thing about it as a personal thing they've got to share their faith, and they will help journey with somebody going forward. So I was thinking, what is the next step for that person? They'll potentially be looking out for opportunities to have a conversation, then be working out how do I begin to journey with that person going forward? How might I open the Bible with them, or how am I coming to church for the first time? That's the intentional disciples. The life sharers all have a story to tell. So they're very much about, actually, there's something that's happened in my life. I want to share my story naturally, what has God done in my life, and how does this relate to the person that I'm speaking to. The team player is all about the local church. So they've come from local church to understand the importance of being part of a Christian community where their faith comes to life. And so they do things with the church as a corporate activity. I really believe that we are in this together. So they're very much happy to invite you along to church events or church courses or church programs and saying, come and be involved in this beautiful community called the local church. The 4th group are the open connectors who will live out their faith. As they live out their faith, they're always open to have a conversation with somebody about their faith. They wouldn't necessarily force it or kind of push on people, but actually are always open. So if somebody asks them, they're very happy to share they wouldn't necessarily be as intentional about starting conversations, but just open it as they live out their life. The fifth group are the compassion revealers, those who believe that actions speak louder than words. They really want people to know ultimately that they are loved by God. And they're often a little bit afraid of offending somebody or putting them off. So they want to know ultimately they are loved by God. And it's actually the way they live out their lives about really generously caring for people. It could be through church projects, but also just through caring for their neighbors as well. And the final group are the Bible revealers, who believe the gospel message is really urgent. They're up for shaking the boat. They're up for saying it as it is. They're up for ruffling some feathers, because I believe actually it's a really important message. People got to hear what this gospel is all about, and they're happy to go and do that. So each of these 6 different profiles, they have a different, on those 4 different spectrums. So the intentional discipler, which is more about being a journey, more about being their personal responsibility, starts also the person, and actually communicates in words and actions. Each of those 6 different profiles is based upon those 4 fundamental attentions. Hopefully that makes sense, Mark.
That is so helpful. Wonderful. So just go back to that previous slide, because you you showed us the different tensions, and did you just give us one of the faith sharing profiles for that? Is that right?
Yeah, I can show you more. If you want to see them all, if I show you more now. So
Yeah, let's just have a quick look at the others. That would be really interesting.
is that working now? My screen sharing is paused, it says. Not had that before.
It's not come up. It says that you're sharing screen, but it's not come up with the presentation.
No, it's still not doing, is it? Sorry, guys. Technical issues. Yeah, I'll try again.
Give it one more go, yeah. No.
Still working. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Maybe just talk us through it. I mean, how does the different personality of faith sharing affect those tensions? Does it flip-flop between the two?
So it does. So, for example, if you take one of those things, for example, the tension about, is it about words, is it about action? The Bible revealer very much is about words. You have to speak and share and proclaim the gospel, and you have to use the Bible. It's rooted in the Bible, and it's how you communicate. It's very much about words. Those who are much more about that kind of compassion revealer, are much more about actually to be loved. I want you to show that you're loved, and much more about actions. They kind of lean on different ends of those tension. That makes sense. Yeah. The 6 has a different makeup of those 4 different undergirding principles. But what they help us to do, I think, in a leadership team, is to think through actually how do each of us approach it, as to how does it work collaboratively. Thinking about your local church helps us think through, as a local church, as a local ministry, or as a working on a food bank, whatever it might be, how are we all made differently, and actually how do we utilize each other's gifts and skills and way of doing it. But I think then working in a church unity group can be really helpful to understand that we approach faith sharing in very different ways. There isn't one way of doing it all. We have these different underlying tensions, and being able to understand that we haven't all got to do things in the same way is really important. We can affirm different ways in which we share our faith. But for all 6 of them, there was always a stretch. There was something to do to help us become slightly more intentional or more maybe powerful doing it. So, for example, one of the example we'll give would be the Bible revealers are very much down the line. They'll say it as it is. If they don't find a space to do that in the local church, they'll do it themselves anyway, because they really believe it's their responsibility to go and do it. But if you can find the right place for a Bible revealer in the life of the church or the life of a unity group to really use that gift, it can be a really powerful thing. As with one church, they did lots of different small breakout groups. Lots of these groups didn't really grow, but 2 of them did grow. The 2 that grew had somebody in that mix who was up for ruffling some feathers and saying it as it is. And sometimes they'd be really useful in the right place, deployed in the right way. So working out how do we best deploy the gifts and the skills we've got as a church to be used in different ways across a town or a city.
That's wonderful, Andy. Thank you so much for that. That makes so much sense, and it's such an encouragement to us all, isn't it, that we've all got a role to play in sharing our faith in a way that suits the way God's made us and the experiences He's given us. Thank you so much. Let's go across to Steve, if that's all right. Steve, we're so grateful to have you with us here. Tell us about Transform Teesside, and then let's find out a bit more about the kind of unity strategy you've had there for sharing faith on Teesside.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Andy. That was really great stuff. I love that that's a resource. I'm going to be sending that out to a bunch of people afterwards. They're wonderful. Yeah, we have a Unity network up here in Teesside called Transforming Teesside Together, and we network around 70 churches across. Teesside is about 4 towns all squashed together into one
Yes.
sort of city area. And so we work across that area together in partnership, and have been doing so for a number of years now. And yeah, we've been very strong for a long time in terms of relationships and kind of praying together, worshiping together, and having that sense of partnership and unity. But we felt really called over the past few years to step out and do more mission together, particularly into evangelism. And I guess that was kind of catalyzed by the fact that as we came out of the pandemic and everyone been in these lockdowns and been through this massive shaking up experience, we realized that we were operating in a different context than we were before the pandemic. And this has been the story in some areas, but not all areas of the UK. But it was in Teesside. We were just seeing a brand new openness to the gospel that we hadn't been seeing at all just 2 or 3 years previously. And we were finding without doing much different in the way we were doing church, people were coming to faith. We were seeing more baptisms. We were seeing people come in off the streets and turn up at worship services, and it felt like something had shifted and had moved, as if God was doing something new. And it wasn't that the church was stepping out in mission in any different way. It just felt like the spiritual atmosphere was a different thing. And I think one of the benefits we had is because our unity was strong, we were able to reflect on this as a city. So rather than just as a church saying, oh, we're in a
Yeah.
big season of new life and growth, we were able to kind of track and have a conversation across the city to say this isn't isolated to a particular church or a particular mission that's happening, is God's just doing something across our area.
That's incredibly exciting, Steve. Can I just ask you a bit more about that? I mean, do you think it's just a kind of a move of God, or do you think there are actually cultural and social reasons why people, were really interested in exploring faith? Can you give us anything more on that?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to tell, isn't it? It's all guesswork, that sort of thing. But I think
Mm,
it's a mixture of both, Mark. I think
okay.
we had the pandemic, which did shift people's perspectives. People who felt secure and safe in the way life was working for them for a long time suddenly
Mm,
weren't secure and safe, and suddenly death was being talked about on a daily basis, and finances became more insecure with the cost of living crisis. People were
mm,
shaken, and when you are shaken, and the things that you used to put your trust in no longer are solid and secure, I think people were starting to question. So I
yeah,
think that there was that very natural human reaction to start to question some of the bigger things. But then
yeah,
actually on reflection, I do think that what we were walking in as well was answered prayer from
yeah,
years and years of praying and united prayer over our area. So I kind of think
yeah,
there was something natural coming out of the pandemic, but I think there was a real answered prayer move of God that was
yeah.
happening in
There's
Teesside.
been some incredible faith sharing on social media as well, hasn't there? I mean, I've enjoyed John Lennox's books, but there's some super clips of him speaking and sharing his faith in very powerful ways, and with some quite powerful context, really, with atheists and so on. There's many more people who've shared their faith and have come to faith. Jordan Peterson has got a huge following, isn't he? So I wonder whether there's something of that as well, that people are getting hold of and seeing that. Maybe that's just my experience, because that's my little sort of bubble that I'm in on social media. But any thoughts on that?
No, definitely. No, I totally agree. I think nationally, we are in a different moment than we were in. If you rewind 10, 20 years ago, having a Christian faith was taboo, and particularly in the public sphere, if journalists or politicians or things like that, they wouldn't confess to having a Christian faith very
Yeah,
openly. And now something has changed. We're seeing a lot more high profile people having faith experiences and learning about Jesus and coming to Jesus, and it feels as if it's not a taboo subject. I think unity movements have sensed that change for a long time, as they've been able to work as churches with the public sector more boldly and openly than perhaps they would have done 10, 15 years ago, where it was very social action focused. I think now you can be a Christian in the public sphere more openly. So there's definitely been some big cultural changes. The moment of dominant atheism, I think, has shifted.
Yeah, fascinating. So you sense this kind of openness to faith, and you start to have the conversation as a unity network, and then you do something pretty ambitious then. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, as we started something called Festival Teesside, which is not like a model for evangelism I think everyone should copy or anything. But as Andy said, it's just about listening to God and trying to follow what He says. And in that moment, as we were praying together and saying, "Hey." We're seeing an openness to the Christian faith that we've not seen before. We've got to respond to this. We prayed, and at that time, it really felt as if God linked us up just at the right time with the Palau Association, who do city-wide evangelistic festivals all across the world, and they're experts in this stuff. And it just so kind of it matched up. Their timings and our timings were just beautifully matched, and we were able to kind of discern together. We put it out to all the churches and just said, "Hey, is this what God's asking us to do?" We don't know how we'd fund anything like this. We don't know what a citywide proclamation evangelism event would look like. We don't know if that's still culturally relevant or not. But is this what God's calling us to do? And we wholeheartedly, sort of unanimously felt like it was what God was calling us to do. And so we started the process, and it evolved. But it was probably a 2 year process, really, year and a half, 2 years, building up to a huge summer of mission, basically. So just this past summer gone, 2024, we united as 70 churches all together, and we did evangelism training, faith sharing training for over 1,000 Christians in Teesside. We for a couple of weeks we just went out on the streets and blessed and served Teesside, and so we did social action events, we did cleaning up events, we did alley transformations, gardening projects all across Teesside, putting hundreds and hundreds of Christians on the streets doing that. Then we went into a week of mission where we did all sorts of different events in prisons, schools, universities. We put a big tent up in a park and held hundreds of men and hundreds of women the next night over for evangelistic events. And it was incredible, really. Is people showed up at all of these events. Doors were opened for us at all the right places. And there was a real sense of the Holy Spirit just showing up. And I just remember we went into this prison, and we took these bikers, BMX riders, into the prison gym hall to do like an event with them. And you've got these about 100 guys sat around the edge of the gym hall, and they watched these bikers and they cheered them and things, and it was great. And then we had someone share their faith story and just invite a prayer response, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure if anyone's going to say anything here, or at least they're going to pray in their heads. If they are, maybe God will do something later on through the chaplains. And he invited them to pray, and nearly all of the room spoke this prayer out loud in response to what this guy was praying. And it was just an incredible moment. And we saw the same at the university campus as well. We did this great open air event at the university campus. And I'm thinking, is anyone really listening to this gospel presentation? Because everyone's talking, it's all busy. And at the end, he just prayed and said, let's pray. Does anyone want to respond with me? And the whole square just goes totally silent. And everyone prayed and wanted responses. And we handed out books and got them linked up with churches and things. And so we just saw some really beautiful things where, and it really didn't feel as if it was anything to do with the strategy or the hype or the quality of the people involved. It really felt like all of that stuff was all right. Like, it was all right. But when the moment mattered, the Holy Spirit just came, and these sort of beautiful silent moments were created, and people responded to faith. We were then building up basically to a big weekend festival where we invited the whole of Teesside to a big park, and we put on
Yeah.
fairground rides and all of that, and proclaimed the gospel across the event. And I remember being inside this park. We had 900 volunteers all trained for this. We had a
Wow.
program of events going on, and we just didn't know if anyone was going to show up or not. And I thought, well, if
Yeah.
100 show up, this looks overkill. And and I was really worried about 10 minutes before we opened the gates. And then as soon as we opened the gates, people just streamed in. We had 30,000 people come. And this is this
Fantastic.
isn't in Manchester or London. This is in Little Teesside.
Wow.
It was really beautiful. Across the whole sort of mission month, we saw over 3,000 faith responses,
Wow.
and people getting then connected in with their local church, and then invited to their alpha courses. So we then just in the September afterwards, we ran 50 alpha courses across the churches all at the same time in unity. And
The story just gets better and better, doesn't it? Before we go on to the alpha courses, I mean, 70 churches, that's a phenomenal number when you think about how many people that comprise thousands of people, isn't it? So you mentioned 900 volunteers at one of the festivals. How many people do you think over the course of the festival events actually, contributed their time to support that? Have you got any idea on that, Steve?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, probably around 1,000 would have been involved in terms of making things happen and volunteering, but then
Yeah.
a few thousand more in terms of being involved to invite their friends, involved
Yeah.
in the church's mission and things like that. So it was.
Yeah. And I know that people gave very generously to make that happen as well, didn't they? So there would have been a lot of giving behind that.
Yeah, huge amounts. And again, I still don't quite know how we funded the whole thing. It was a total faith venture, had no funding in place before. And the Palau Association were great with that because they were like, oh, don't worry, God will bring in the funding. And I'm there like, but this is Teesside. Like, we don't have rich Christians in
Yeah.
Teesside. We've got a lot of poor Christians, and now and what's lovely is we're now in a position. It was entirely paid off. There's no debts involved at all with this.
Wow.
And I can't even now, as the chair of the festival, tell you fully how that was paid for. There was some big gifts, but there was a huge spread of just individuals, churches giving, and it was just wonderful, just wonderful. So God really provided. It's why it's the sort of thing you don't do this because it's a good strategy. You do it because God tells you to, and if God tells you to, then it's gonna all slot together. So it was a beautiful summer we just had.
Yeah, wow, it's incredible. So tell us more about the alpha courses because this is just another incredible part of the story, isn't it? The 50 alpha courses all running at a similar time.
Yeah, well, we did a dry run the year before actually, and just put out we want to have a go. At how do we make a joint alpha strategy work? I mean, it's really simple. Is you tell us you just to come up with the start date and you say, guys, we'd love to kind of all push alpha together. And so sign up if your church wants to run an alpha, or if your church wants to run 2 or 3 alphas, please sign up. And we're all going to make it happen at the same time. We advertise it jointly then. Everyone kind of invites people at the same time. There's a bit of extra push in prayer and unity as we do that. And then we do a joint away day together, which feels so much better than just doing an away day by yourselves. It was just incredible when you just have a few hundred people in a room, and you're being led, but through the videos. And Alpha's having a real moment, isn't it? At the moment, this new video series that they produced a few years ago is just so fruitful. My church hadn't really done it much until the pandemic, and I started running it online in the pandemic, and now we do them back to back throughout the year because it's been so fruitful for us.
Right.
And it's got a real broad sense to it. Alpha, it allows most traditions are able to engage with Alpha, so it lends itself really well to a citywide movement.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible story. And I mean, I'm sure it's been a huge encouragement to the whole church across Teesside. Has there been any feedback that you've gathered in terms of, being ambitious for the future, or what's the kind of feedback been from the church?
Yeah, Well, I mean, there's a mixture of things, really. There's the immediate stuff that we've seen. So we have seen new people become Christians, new people go on from Alpha. We're starting to now see baptisms come in from the end of the Alpha courses, and so regularly I'm seeing baptisms happening across the churches as the fruit of this. So I mean, and that's wonderful to see. But kind of a more kind of bigger picture level. I really feel like we took some spiritual ground by doing this. There was something about it of the Church of Jesus Christ in unity being loud with its good
Mm,
news and being bold. And there was something
mm,
about just the spiritual, there's whole areas that the enemy is in charge of in our cities, and I think we took some spiritual ground off of him, and we were loud about it, bold about it, and I think that's that we've that's going to be one of the long lasting impacts of what we've just done. And I
mm.
think we're going to start, I think we're going to walk in the fruit of this for many years. I think some of the testimonies will come out is not just, oh, I gave my life at Festival Teesside, but more that, I heard the gospel proclaimed and it started
Mhm,
a journey.
mhm.
And so, yeah, it kick-started something. So we're loving that. In terms of the church, though, I do think we've grown in our confidence that proclamation is okay to do and it works. And we've seen it work. So we've seen these events happen and we've seen the Holy Spirit just move and come and God doing something. And I think for me personally, it raised my sense of faith and anticipation that, when we're doing community mission, let's be bold about sharing the good news that we've got. And there's ways that we can do that that fit with our church traditions, fit with our
Yeah.
theology, and are able to just be bold and hungry for kind of the fruit it brings. And now, yeah, I mean, we all were a little bit tired. 2024 was very, very busy. And so just now, we are now starting to kind of plan, hey, what does this look like for the future? We can't run a Festival Teesside every year, but how do we make sure that faith sharing and evangelism is part of our rhythm together as a unity movement? So that's what
Mm.
we're trying to figure out at the moment.
Amazing, amazing. Nathan's put a question in the chat here, and I encourage all those on the call to pop a question in the chat if you've got one. So Nathan's asked, "Wow, yeah, really refreshing to hear such a positive experience. Did you have any experience of managing expectations in terms of where people make their new home? Those that have explored and are coming to faith through this."
Yeah, there is. Yeah, managing expectations. The Plough Association were big on this because you've got to get this balance when you're planning something like this. Of being bold in our vision and our anticipation and our prayers for what we're praying for, but also managing expectations that this doesn't mean that your church suddenly goes from 10 people to 500 people overnight. So there was a little bit of that. Um, the way we did it as well is this the strategy was it wasn't we will do evangelism for you. It was you are going to do evangelism. You are going to share your faith. You're going to invite your friends. What we're going to do is provide a great big excuse for you to share your faith personally,
Yeah.
for your church to engage with this. And actually, the churches that reaped the most fruit were the churches that really went for this. The individuals who reaped the fruit from this actually were the ones who went for this. So there was a sense of that that afterwards. We got people to fill in response cards, and one of the questions in the response cards was, did a friend bring you, and what church was that friend connected with? And so when we're then referring back to churches, we're referring them to their friend at that church. And so
Okay.
there were some churches that actually got way beyond their expectations, and then there were some churches that were lower than what they'd expected. But actually, it's because we directly linked them with the church that they would have been linked with. There were a number who weren't linked to any church, and we shared those around their sort of local church, really. So there was, afterwards with anything like that, there's always a little bit of, oh, I'd hoped for more sort of the attitude, and that's inevitable. But we just kind of point people to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
The bigger picture is actually the Church of Jesus Christ in Teesside is bigger than it was. People are more confident in faith sharing than they were, and I think we've taken some ground spiritually across the area. So there's a bit of
Yeah. Brilliant. So, Steve, I mean, Nathan asked a great question, which is really about some of the foundational things that need to be put in place if you're going to have a united approach to transforming your place spiritually. Have you got any other thoughts in terms of foundations that need to be put in place for a unity network, church network, to think about spiritual transformation? I mean, one obvious one would be, how do you deal with theological unity, for example, using the Alpha course?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the foundations are a lot of things that you guys talk about in Gather Movement all the time about unity movements, and I think that is, prayer, relationships, and love of your geography. Those sort of three things are the core to all of our unity movements, and they are the foundations. Really, is that if we're praying together, then we're able to hear God's voice, if and kind of respond in what He's calling us to do as the church. If we love our geography, then it gives us a sense of kind of urgency and passion for that place. Like, I want to see Jesus proclaimed in this area, and it forces us to do that. And if we've got good relationships with each other, if we trust each other, then it just means that you've then got the foundation to work together. If you don't trust each other and like each other, you're probably not going to get too far organizing citywide evangelism. You might get bit somewhere, but you're probably not going to get too far. It's the foundation is trust and prayer and friendship. Because if you know each other and you trust each other, then you're more likely to send your people to that thing that's going to be organized, aren't you? Whereas if you're not quite sure about that church and not quite sure about that person or their motives, then you're probably not going to back it too much as a church. So there is a lot of foundation stuff. But if the big one is hearing God's voice together, isn't it? So if we're praying and we're trying to get a sense of discernment, then we're able to kind of hear God and follow Him. Theological differences have never been a huge issue for us in Teesside. Not that they aren't there; they're definitely there. I think you've got to put them in perspective, basically. And I think if you really love your area and there's a sense of the desperate need for just Jesus and His kingdom, then it just puts everything else into perspective. And I think that's one of the things we've been gifted with. Now, we had 70 churches involved in this, and we usually get about 70 at most of the sort of network things that we do. There are more than 70 churches in Teesside, so this wasn't every single church. And of course, there's those churches on the more very conservative reformed side of things that probably wouldn't have engaged. And then there's those churches on the very liberal side of the church that probably wouldn't have engaged as much. Still our brothers and sisters. We still love them to bits. It doesn't have to be everyone that gets involved, but it's great when it's a good number of people. But yeah, I think just trying to Alpha is good though, it is pretty broad and wide. It kind of it does reach right through to the Catholics and right through to the Reformed conservative side as well. It's not too bad on either side, but also not everyone who was involved in the festival did an Alpha course. Some people did a start course. Some people did their own sort of discipleship thing. Obviously, it helps if you can advertise it all together and do it through one website, but not everyone had to. There's no sort of, hey, to be involved in Unity, you have to run an Alpha. It's kind of here's what we're offering, who wants to be involved, and we'll make this happen. But I think Alpha's probably the broadest thing you've got that you can unite the church around in terms of discipleship anyway, because it's got a good reputation across most parts of the church.
Wonderful, Steve. Well, you must have built huge confidence in the church that it can do great things through, that unity, project together. So yeah, so exciting. Has anybody got any questions or comments that they want to give at this point? Don't be shy. Nathan.
Hi, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but this is like gold dust really for me. How you said that a lot of the stuff was built on kind of prayer and historical kind of relationship. Do you have a kind of feel about how long it takes to build that sort of thing together? The context I'm in is that I'm in Southampton and we are a city that has been known for church unity, but actually since COVID, there's been a real change of the guard of people in leadership positions. And we're kind of in a phase where it feels like we're rebuilding our unity network because it's new people in post. So the organizations relate to each other really healthily, but actually the leaders barely know each other. So how do you get to a point where you actually kind of have that? You talked about trust building up over time, and I just had a question which was like, how long do we have to keep going? How long before we can kind of start doing some things that really are like bringing all the resources together and sharing mission together?
Mm.
And maybe, Steve, you could just include Esther's question in that, because she was asking how did the 70 churches come together at the beginning? I think that's, we bring that to both together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess if I start at the beginning, then, I yeah, I mean, there's always history of church unity that is in different forms. In its sort of latest form, probably about 13 years ago, just about three of us in Middlesbrough really felt we felt convicted by the guys in York, actually, who'd been praying together for a long time and had a weekly prayer meeting, and that just caused us to say, well, who is praying for Middlesbrough? And we felt like, well, if we're not praying for it, then really who is? And so three of us committed to meeting every week on a Tuesday morning, and then from that we began to grow that. We then got linked in with the other towns who had some different forms of unity and prayer meetings and things, and in the end we kind of brought them all together, and so that's sort of just praying together weekly, and that's been up and down, but we've been doing it for 13 years. So sometimes it can be 30 odd church leaders at that weekly prayer meeting. This morning it was 7 people. So you're just never sure who shows up or how big it's going to be. But the consistency of just, yeah, we're praying. We're the people who are long term in this area, and we want to kind of work for unity, because unity really is powerful. So this is unity is a very effective mission strategy. By the way, it's not just a nice icing on the cake thing. We're not going to reach our towns and cities unless we work in unity together. And I think that's just a spiritual truth. I don't think it's even necessarily a practical thing. I think it's a spiritual truth. Is God loves unity, and he commands a blessing when he sees it. And so for us to see these bigger impacts, it's got to be in unity. So it's worth just working hard at it. We had a similar season through the pandemic, actually, Nathan. Is just before the pandemic, I would have said our unity were flying high. It was right at the top. We had a big conference planned called Movement Day, and it was going to be an amazing event where we really discussed and planned the future as the church together. And then the pandemic hit just before, and lockdown went into place, and it was all cancelled. And then as we emerged out of lockdown, we realized that I reckon 25% of the church leaders changed during the pandemic. So people retired or moved on or went off ill, things like that. And so it felt like we were emerging, feeling very fragile in our unity. And I remember having to really dig in to rebuild it. And it took, yeah, it just took a lot of digging in. Now it didn't take us long to build the unity the second time. But it did take, we had to really put work into it again. So just going around meeting people, praying for people, casting vision, telling people unity is important. It took a lot of rebuilding at a time where I didn't have much energy anyway. So it was hard work to rebuild again, but it didn't take as long. Um, it totally depends on personalities, though, as to how long it takes, Nathan. I think is some people take a long time to trust. Other people, do you know what? You have a great coffee with them, you work together on that joint service, and suddenly you've got a synergy and you can trust each other. So it's not an exact science. I guess what I would say is don't wait for it to be perfect unity across all the church. Work with what you've got. Work with those who you've got real synergy with. Bless those, pray for people, look after them pastorally, and it just builds. It just does, and you'll get a sense where you've got enough trust to do something.
Thanks, Steve. Just another perhaps final question now. I'd love to know whether you think a church unity movement can do both social and spiritual transformation together. As we look around the country, I guess we see unity movements that do one or the other well, but not necessarily both. Have you got any thoughts or advice about that?
Well, I mean, please, Jesus, let's hope we can do both. Yeah, I guess that for me, the big thing is kingdom theology. I think kingdom theology is the reason we are able to have citywide unity in the UK now in a way that we couldn't 30 years ago. And I think that's, churches across the spectrum talk about kingdom theology much more naturally than we ever used to when I was growing up. You're either evangelism or social action. Kingdom theology, and I just word it really simply for us. If Jesus was king over Teesside, what would Teesside look like? Now, if you ask that question to any group of Christian leaders, it's totally obvious. It looks like poverty being wiped out. It looks like justice for those who are in situations of injustice, and it looks like people coming to Christ, churches being packed, and the gospel being proclaimed. It looks like all of it, doesn't it? Like, it just looks like that if Jesus was king and his kingship came in your town or city, and that's where we keep our focus. So, as a unity movement, we don't have many debates about what age is the right age to baptize or how to bless the sacraments and things like that. We don't spend much time on that. But if you just ask big questions like, hey, if Jesus is king, then what does it look like? Then surely it's all of it. But I guess one of the hindrances I guess some unity movements face is that different people are excited by different parts of the kingdom vision, and some unity movements are made up of people who are more excited by the social justice side of things, and some unity movements are more excited by the evangelism side of things. And I think it's not that we want to burden our unity movement leaders with doing more, but just let's expand the people in the room. Let's get different groups of people together. Definitely, we're really great with our network across church leaders. We've now pushed forward with our sort of evangelism strategy as a movement, but we're not as great as a whole load of towns and cities with our sort of collaborative social action. And that involves getting different people in the room. That involves different tables and different conversations, which is something that's on our sort of vision agenda. How do we move forward with that? So yeah, please God, can we do both? There's definitely no hindrance to doing both, apart from we just got to get the right people in the room who are excited by the right part of God's vision.
Wonderful, Steve. Well, I can't thank you both enough. You've given us a real feast today with some really new, exciting things to think about in terms of sharing our faith. And I'm sure we'll take this away with us and share it in our context. We're so pleased that the rest of you have been on here to share your thinking and minds and questions around this. It makes all the difference when we record a webinar that we've actually had a bit of a group discussion rather than just one person presenting. So thank you for being part of this session today. And the links are all made available on our YouTube channel. So do share the links around so that these stories and tools can be taken up by others. As we finish our time together, I just want to let you know about a couple of notices. At the end of January in London, we've got a special event on called the Intercultural Church and City Transformation Gathering. We've got Andy Frost here. Andy, do you want to just give us a quick notice about this?
Yeah, it's going to be a wonderful time. I think just so many different people come together from different kind of cultural backgrounds, different ages, and different denominations, thinking actually how do we work better as the church in our places to see transformation take place really. So I'll be having to lead the one on evangelism, looking at different styles, different cultures of evangelism, and how we work together collaboratively on that as well. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks, Andy. And next month, our learning community webinar is looking at systems leadership. This is what our cities and towns are beginning to train themselves in, rather than a sort of more traditional sense of command or control leadership where you know where you are now and you know where you want to be. Systems leadership starts from the point of saying, actually, these are complex problems where we all need to work together, and there's no one person that has the A to B kind of vision. We need to work it out collaboratively together. And so systems leadership is a new leadership discipline that is really emerging around the world in cities, and in particular here in Greater Manchester, where devolution is well embedded. And so we're going to have Elaine Morgan from Greater Manchester Combined Authority here to share a little bit about the stories of the benefits of systems leadership, what it is, and how we make the best out of it as church unity leaders, as we seek to help churches work together, but also work collaboratively with other organizations, whether they be civic, health, or the voluntary sector. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Thank you, everybody, so much for being with us today. And I think we should just maybe end with a prayer, if that's okay. So let me just pray us out as we close. Father God, we thank you for your love for us. And we thank you that you revealed that love for us through the life of Jesus, his coming to us as one of us. And we thank you that we have this certainty in history and the teachings of the Bible. And Lord, we want to also say thank you that you've revealed yourself in our lives, that we have come to know you, that you are living and true. And Father God, we thank you for today's time of reflecting on how we share our faith. Thank you for the thinking and work that's been done by leaders and churches in the north and the south of this nation. And we pray for your glory, that you might teach us to pray and to share our faith in our cities and towns. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I do look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thank you.